This meeting is being recorded.
In this next section of Chapter 4, Part 13, we're going to look at now disubstituted cyclohexane, and we're going to introduce how to draw multiple substituents and convert from this flattened form to our chair form over here. So the first thing that we should note is that we now have two substituted groups, so the chlorine here and our methyl substituent over here. So now that we have more than one substituent, we have to factor in their orientations in 3D space. So we can use dash and wedge notation to note the conformations of these substituents. So let's take a look at these two chair forms over here. And what we see is that what is on our dash is the chlorine, and that will be pointing up. So we decide that that will be pointing up. So that's what we see over here on this side. In this first structure, we see our chlorine pointing up in an axial position. And then also our chlorine is pointing upwards in this equatorial position. So we've performed a ring flip, right, to go between these two structures. So we have the chlorine group up in both possible chair conformations, and then the methyl group down in both possible chair conformations. And that's just because we have one on a dash, or one on a wedge. So the one on the wedge, we're going to point up, and then the one on the dash here, our methyl group, will be pointing down. So let's look at another example of this. Say now we have a methyl and an ethyl substituent, 1 carbon apart. So first we will draw the chair by labeling each of the substituted carbons, and then translate from our structure here to the chair conformation. So we're asked to draw both of these. So step 1, we're going to draw our ethyl group here pointing up and our methyl group pointing down. So we draw our chair conformation, right? So if you remember, we start with that wide V, we go down and up, then we go down and up again. Our ethyl has to be pointing up, so we're going to call this guy over here carbon 1, and that's where you see the ethyl in the axial position pointing up. And then on our carbon 3, we have our methyl group pointing down here in an equatorial position, and then the hydrogen is in the axial. So we have ethyl pointing up, methyl pointing down. Now, when we do our ring flip to get to our second structure here, right, these two are in equilibrium. This is what we started with our ethyl pointing up in an axial position, our methyl pointing down in the equatorial position. And now when we do that ring flip, so our ethyl group is now in an equatorial position, and our methyl group has switched from equatorial to axial. And they are both still in that up position and down position from our original structure due to the wedge and the dash. So again, these are our two conformations, and you can do a ring flip, right? So this one move down, this one move up, and then this guy would move over here and point down. So that's how we generate our one structure from the other. And we're asked here to confirm, or reason rather, which chair would be more stable. And so let's identify what's in the axial, what's in the equatorial position. So this is axial, this is equatorial, here we have axial, and here we have equatorial. So looking at these structures, we have one group in each position. So we have to consider which group is larger, which would cause a higher energy difference in the axial position. So if you recall, the equatorial position is always the position that is more stable. So since our larger group here, the ethyl group, is in the equatorial position in this conformation, this would be our more stable conformation. And that's everything from section 413. We're going to continue with 2 more slides here in section 414. And these regard what's called cis and trans stereoisomerism. So we're going to look at what a stereoisomer is when we in chapter 5, and we'll have a whole lab on that. But we don't talk about stereoisomerism with cycloalkanes, specifically disubstituted cycloalkanes. And depending on whether the two substitutions groups are on the same side of the ring or opposite side of the ring, we will call these cis. So this will be our cis isomer over here, where both of our substituents are on the same side of the ring, right? This is our dividing line here. And then over here, we have our two substituents on opposite sides of our ring. So we would call this the trans isomer over here. So cis, both substituents on the same side of a disubstituted cycloalkane. Trans means that the two groups are on opposite sides of the ring. So these are both going to be represented in chair conformations on this next slide. And let's see if we can, again, rationalize which structure will be the more stable out of these two. So we have our cis conformation here. We have our trans conformation over here. And this first isomer, we see an equilibrium with these two structures. So we do ring flip to go from one to the other. And what we see here is that we have an axial position, an equatorial position, and then over here we have another axial here, and then equatorial here. So we have one of each. So one axial position, one equatorial in these two chair conformations for our cis structure. The trans isomer, that can exist with, so these are both in axial position. So we have axial here for this one. And then over here, we have both equatorial positions. So since the trans isomer can exist with both of these substituted groups being in an equatorial position, overall, the trans isomer would be the more stable of these two possible conformations. So that is everything from chapter 4. You will not be responsible for the details of section 415 on exams or quizzes.